Whenever you're thinking about early Disneyland, and all the stuff that was around back then, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably not going to be pets. But from Disney's desire to provide the best possible service at their park, and with the help of an old dog food company from the 1950s, they ended up creating a one-of-a-kind pet motel a few years after Disneyland opened. So, this installment of Opening Days is going to be all about the original Ken-L Land and what exactly happened to it. But to get there, we'll need to start outside Disneyland with the growing popularity of a canned dog food called Ken-L Ration.
My dog's bigger than your dog. My dog's faster than yours. My dog's shinier 'cause he gets Ken-L Ration. My dog's better than yours.
Even though the food itself had been around since the 1920s, Ken-L Ration really first rose to prominence around the early 1950s, being one of the first dog food brands to utilize some creative advertising, boasting its inclusion of government-inspected horse meat, something they promoted as more natural and better for your dog. Of course, the reality was just that horse meat was one of the cheapest meats you could get post-World War I, back when they first started making it. And the whole lean red meat thing they came up with later was really just a marketing ploy, to now spin the cheapest option as also the healthiest one. In a sense, Ken-L Ration actually kinda invented the idea of buying food made specifically for your dog, as the only other commercially available dog foods back then were stuff like milk bones and other dog cakes, not really stuff that was considered real food. And by taking advantage of TV and radio advertising in the 1950s, Ken-L Ration ended up dominating the pet food market all throughout that decade, with its advertisements appearing on everything from TV programs like Bewitched to Ozzie and Harriet.
But here's a trick nobody had to teach him. I get him Ken-L Ration, and he does the rest.
Sure he does. Like all dogs, he loves his Ken-L Ration. Why, every can of Ken-L Ration is packed with nourishing lean red meat, choice cuts of U.S. government-inspected horse meat. It contains other essential ingredients and is fortified with every vitamin and mineral, every nutrient a dog is known to need. Chlorophyllin, too.
Meanwhile, back over at Disneyland, the park was continuing to grow throughout the late 1950s, seeing more than 5 million visitors before the end of 1956, a little over a year after it first opened. And with the park's notoriety growing right alongside its number of guests, a certain problem was becoming a lot more noticeable, one stemming from the fact that Disneyland had a strict no-pet policy. Unlike many of the other outdoor amusement parks of the time, you wouldn't be able to get any non-service animals past the main gate, something that Walt feared would lead to people leaving pets inside their cars, which is, typically not a good idea. So, he wanted to build a specific kennel just outside the park's main gate, either for people who weren't aware of the rule or just didn't want to have to board their animal at a real kennel if they were only going to be in the park for a couple hours. And considering just how advertisement-centric the people over at Ken-L Ration were at the time, it's no surprise that they jumped at the chance to sponsor something at Disneyland, a pretty great promotional opportunity that plenty of other companies were taking advantage of too back then. So, fast forward a year later, and the kennel officially opens on January 18th of 1958. Named primarily after its sponsor, Ken-L Land was also a little play on the Disneyland name too, as you could also pronounce it Ken-L Land. I'm really hoping that whoever came up with that one got a raise, it's just way too clever. But even better than the name was the kennel service, as it offered just about every amenity a dog could want. A clean, air-conditioned building, individual cages, and a nice bowl of Ken-L Ration, all for the low price of 25 cents a day. You just can't beat that. The whole thing was really just a testament to how dedicated Disneyland was to guest service, not only wanting the very best for its human visitors, but also their pets, even going so far as to pipe in specially made relaxing music for them, the same stuff that's been playing in the background of this video. And beyond just the kennel itself, Ken-L Ration sponsorship also brought with it their very own Kids Amateur Dog Show, an annual event that would now be hosted at Disneyland. Kids all around Orange County would enter in at smaller local competitions with their dogs, and the winners of all those would be invited to Disneyland for the finals, so to speak. with the event's categories ranging from stuff like largest dog to smallest dog. Just about everyone had a shot at going home with a prize, which included stuff like Ken-L Ration badges, shirts, and an assortment of all their products. Most of all these different contests were either hosted just outside Disneyland on a grassy, undeveloped part of the property, or inside the park on the Magnolia Park bandstand over in Adventureland. And after the whole thing concluded, all the winners would be invited to participate in a parade of champions that would take place on Main Street. And while the event might not have been the biggest thing going on at Disneyland back then, it was still popular enough to get people like Richard Simmons to make an appearance in 1958, an actor known primarily for his role as Sergeant Preston on TV. It's hard to say when exactly, but the annual dog show ended up stopping sometime around the mid-1960s, likely because Ken-L Ration's sponsorship of the kennel itself was about to run out. In the years since its opening, commercially sold dog foods had become a lot more commonplace throughout the United States. And with that came competition, as Ken-L Ration's lower-end horse meat was no longer the only option, something that definitely hit them financially, as they no longer monopolized the industry like before, eventually leading to their inability to keep funding Kennel-Land. While the kennel continued to exist, its sponsorship was taken over by the Cal-Can Company in 1968, subsequently renaming the whole thing to the Cal-Can Kennel Club. Their sponsorship would continue through the 1970s, with the company even funding the construction of a similar kennel over in Florida, as Disney also wanted one for guests of their newly built Magic Kingdom. After Cal-Can let their sponsorship lapse, the Gaines Pet Food Company took their spot from 1986 to 1991, now renaming it again to the Pet Care Kennel. And finally, Nestle took it over in 1993. First under their Friskies brand, and then eventually Purina, after they acquired that food in 2001. Over time, the original building was slowly covered up by newer structures that Disney put in front of it. And while the kennel is still housed in that same structure from 1958, the only part of it that's still visible today is the far left corner of it, where you check in your animals, kinda just showing how limited the space is nowadays, compared to when Disneyland first opened. But the kennel is still operational, and while it might not be as big and luxurious as the Best Friends Pet Care Center they have over at Disney World, which replaced all of their old individual kennels on property back in 2010, it still gets the job done well enough. Nowadays, if you want to board your pet there, it'll be around $20 for the day. A little bit more than that original 25 cents price tag, but you'll still get all the old perks, even including a meal for your animal. Only this time, it's not going to be Ken-L Ration, as the entire brand pretty much disappeared back in 1995, when Heinz bought it and discontinued its production. If anything, the story of Ken-L Land really just shows how packed Disneyland is with history, and how even a little dog kennel that most people don't even know is there has a story going all the way back to the park's early days. A story that was intrinsically tied to the life and death of an obscure 1950s dog food.
I don't understand it. So far, I haven't been able to teach him anything.
Well, it takes time. Look how long it took me to train you.